Hello, and welcome to Phenomenon Radio, the show that covers thought-provoking breakthroughs in the fields of UAP UFOs to discover fascinating truths, first-hand accounts, and investigative insights into the expanding confluence of physical and mental exposure to this worldwide phenomenon. Hosted by world-renowned experiencer of the 1980 Rendlesham Bentwaters UFO incident, John Burroughs, and Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist Linda Moulton Howe. And now, leading off the program, here's Linda Moulton Howe.
5 years ago, on October 2nd, 2010, John Burroughs and I joined former RAF Bentwaters Staff Sergeant Jim Penniston in Phoenix to work with the Ancient Aliens television crew. John and Jim were describing on camera their December 26, 1980 encounters with unidentified aerial lights and beams in Rendlesham Forest, England. Penniston even recalled a triangular craft that had symbols on it. Jim explained how he touched those symbols and immediately received a telepathic download of both binary code and mental impressions of time travelers from a distant future where they might not survive without genetic help from Earth. Jim Penniston had his original 1980 notebook with him in which he had sketched a black, glassy, triangular craft. And during one of our breaks in the taping, Jim Penniston asked us to look at the end of his notebook. Several pages had zeros and ones written in black ink. John Burroughs was surprised because he had never seen this before. Penniston told us that he had never showed anyone this binary code that he wrote in an altered state in Rendlesham Forest after touching the raised symbols on that triangular craft. Eventually, we were able to get translations of the zeros and ones. There were words along with latitudes and longitudes. The words included, quote, exploration of humanity, continuous for planetary advance, fourth coordinate, continuous, before, close quote. The latitudes and longitudes included Caracol, Belize, Sedona, Arizona, the Great Pyramid in Giza, Egypt, the Nazca Lines in Peru, Taishan Chu in China, the doorway to the Temple of Apollo in Naxos, Greece, and either the town center of Woodbridge, Suffolk, England, not far from the Rendlesham Forest encounter site, or west of Ireland in the Atlantic Ocean, where a place called High Brazil might once have been. Neither Jim Penniston nor John Burroughs understands what all that means, but both have been left with a feeling that those ancient sites are actively linked from the past to the present day and a coming future of great upheaval and change on this planet. Last year, the words tetrad and blood moon started making worldwide news about a total lunar eclipse on April 15th, 2014, that would be the first in a series of 4 total eclipses coming every 6 months. Tetrad means the number 4, and blood relates to the reddish color that some total moon eclipses become, depending upon how the Earth's atmosphere scatters and refracts light back to the moon's surface. The second blood moon was on October 8th, 2014. The third was April 4th, 2015. And the fourth will be 17 days from now on the night of September 27th to 28, 2015. Adding to the eeriness of the rare blood moon sequence, there was also a total solar eclipse on March 20th, 2015, between the second and third blood moons. In Jewish tradition, a solar eclipse in a tetrad of blood moons is a sign of bad things to come to this world. Since 2015 years ago, 8 lunar tetrads have coincided with important Jewish holidays. This 2014 to 2015 tetrad has been especially rare because it has not only coincided in sequence with the Jewish feast days of Passover, Sukkot, Passover, and Sukkot, but this is now the end of Shemitah year that began in September 2014. Historically, periods of Shemitah are linked to collapses of economies, kingdoms, or nations that do not do God's will. And this 2014 to 2015 tetrad is the first time in 2,000 years that all 4 blood moons have occurred on all Jewish feast days in a Shemitah year. On top of that, the September 2015 starts a new Jubilee year, the 40th Jubilee year since Christ was crucified in Jerusalem. Jubilee years are based on rounds of 7 Shemitahs. During the last Jubilee year in 1967, the State of Israel took possession of Jerusalem for the first time in 2,000 years. Jerusalem is the city where Christ said he was sacrificed for mankind's sins. Because this 2014 to 2015 blood moon tetrad is so in sync with Jewish feast days, there have been many prophecies that Earth is now entering the so-called end times and start of tribulation, in which the Antichrist will rise and Christ himself returns to battle and defeat the Antichrist. One website, ShemitahBloodMoons.net, says, quote, "It is prophesied the end times will occur within 1 generation of the establishment of the Jewish state," close quote. The year of that establishment was 1948, after World War II, when persecuted Jews from all over the world were returned to Israel. As the modern world seems increasingly violent and chaotic, is this rare 2014 to 2015 lunar tetrad that coincides with Passover, Sukkot, Shemitah, and the new Jubilee year building to a World War III involving both humans and other dimensionals? If so, will this usher in the Battle of Armageddon described in the New Testament's Revelation? One man who has devoted his life's work to studying the prophecies of Nostradamus, the Hopis, and the implications of astronomical events like this tetrad of blood moons is John Hogue. 3 of his recent books are Predictions 2015-2016, Predictions for the Last Blood Moon, and the Essential Hopi Prophecies. After this short break, John Hogue will join us to give his thoughts about what significance there might be in those 7 latitudes and longitudes received from binary code in Rendlesham Forest on December 26, 1980, what his research suggests about the coming future after the blood moon tetrad ends on September 27th to 28th, and what the Hopi Indian prophecies foretell about this uncertain time of the 21st century.
You're listening to Phenomenon Radio Live on KGRA DB with Bentwaters experiencer John Burroughs and Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist and Earthfiles reporter and editor Linda Moulton Howe. Tonight's special guest, John Hogue, will join us right after these messages. Stay with us, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight on Phenomenon Radio with tonight's very special interview with John Hogue. To start the interview tonight, here's Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Race. And John Hogue, welcome to Phenomenon Radio with John Burroughs and me. And as I said in the intro, one of the driving forces of content on this Phenomenon Radio series is related back to the mysteries of December 26 to 28, 1980, when John Burroughs is the only person known to have had close-up encounters twice with mysterious lights, and Jim Penniston with him once on December 26th, in which Penniston remembers a triangular craft that had symbols on it that he touched. John Burroughs, his mind is completely blocked. He has amnesia, but he was known to have been there, and it is a complex phenomenon which still puzzles both of them and everybody who was there to this day. And as I gave that list in the introduction of the latitudes and longitudes that we were able to get out of the strings of zeros and ones that Jim Penniston wrote down after the December 26th encounter with this craft and symbols, and that they included Caracol, Belize, Sedona, Arizona, the Great Pyramid in Giza, Egypt, the Nazca Lines in Peru, Taishan Chu in China, the doorway to the Temple of Apollo in Naxos, Greece, and possibly this one latitude, longitude, which has been controversial and not clear in its interpretation, whether it was the town center of Woodbridge, which would have been near where this craft was in the forest, or west of Ireland a long way into the Atlantic Ocean to a kind of mythological reference to High Brazil. What I'm wondering, from all the work that you have done, what do you think about these sites in terms of some sort of an ancient network of locations that now, in this strange time coming, that everyone seems to feel that huge change is afoot on this planet? Do you think that something, some force, some intelligence from another timeline or another dimension could actually activate these sites in order to accomplish something in this time of Shemitah and change?
Well, the first thing, Linda, that I must always ask myself when dealing with remarkable phenomenon like this is, to what point do I absorb the information, or at what point do I perhaps subconsciously project what I want it to be? This is one thing I've learned in 30 years of prophecy study, is that it not only is it a study of what people have done through ancient up to modern times to actually accurately predict the future, but it's also a story of how the prophets and the people receiving the message have to filter what they are absorbing through the limits of their cultural hopes and fears, and what minds are able to understand in certain periods of history. And so the other thing that I do in this work is, when I study people like Nostradamus and other prophets, I try as best I can to get any information to understand just how they would react to their own visions. For they had to then write them down into the language, into the limitations of ego and understanding of the persona, the mask, that is the personality that we carry through our lives as souls on this earth. And so the question then is this connection to all these links, these different latitude, longitude links, is this indeed what it was meant to be, and is this indeed the time, or are we reaching for that? And because the times are unusual, and you'll see this again and again in many periods where people believe that there's immense changes in history about to happen, the anticipation that the outcome will be something that either the culture is indoctrinated, as in all the eschatological traditions of the world. I wrote a book in 1999 called Messiahs, which looked at 36 different messianic traditions around the world that all had an idea that their Savior, East-West, native, have it what you will, that their Savior was the right one and everybody else was wrong.
And today, we are near a World War III just by the energy of different nations arguing about whose God is superior to another.
Well, and there's also the immediate aspect of what is going on with something that I've been writing about since 2007, dealing with Nostradamus' prophecies about a war with Iran. And they are very clear and dated, much more clear than usual with him, and naming, for instance, the Strait of Hormuz in 16th century language as a flashpoint in a war with the Persians, and a true serpent, a fleet of the true serpent, which most likely, I mean, what I would gather from that is that since 9/11, a year after 9/11, which is an anniversary tomorrow, on September 11th, be the 14th anniversary of the attack. A year after that, which would be the 13th anniversary of this event, George W. Bush put on all warships of the U.S. Navy the 13-striped flag, red and yellow striped flag, with the snake unraveled that says, "Don't tread on me," from the American Revolution. That Navy Jack is supposed to stay on the Navy ships until the end of the War on Terror. Well, the true serpent is probably, it could be one of the ways Nostradamus is trying to describe the fleet that's melted and sunk in the Arabian Gulf. That's what they used to call it in the 16th century, not the Persian Gulf. Off Karmania, which is the Strait of the Persian side, the Iranian side of the Strait of Hormuz. By Le Tridental, the Trident. Now, that can mean a Trident submarine melts the Iranian fleet. It's not clear which fleet is melted and sunk or plunged to the bottom. It also could resemble what, if you look at the modern Iranian flag and you look at the abstract script mentioning Allah that is in the center of the flag in the white field in the tricolor, if you look at the middle of this Rose of the Martyr, it's the red rose of the martyr, in graveyards around Tehran, all the men who died fighting Saddam Hussein, Iraq in the Persian Gulf War, or the Iran-Iraq War, they're buried there under fields of red roses. The rose, if you look at the abstract, the parts that float off of it, actually, if you look then at what is not floating off of it, it's a trident that's dominated by the sword of Allah. So the trident could also be a description of the modern Iranian flag. Now, what's important about this is that a few years back, I started to say that looking at the astrology of Nostradamus, it seems that he picked, with the Mars-Saturn conjunction, he picked a new king or modern leader who would be elected, who could bring peace on Earth for a long time, related to a calamitous war under Cancer. Cancer is the sign of the United States, 13 degrees Sun Cancer. It's also the sun sign of George W. Bush, 13 degrees Cancer, exactly on the natal or birth chart of the United States. The calamitous war under Cancer may be describing the Iraq War, but it says that this leader could bring peace on Earth for a long time. So despite I've been a very noted critic of the president, I had to say, well, it looks here like he might do something diplomatically in the 11th hour before war happens that could actually, by the end of 2014 or in 2015, no later than June 30th, astrologically speaking, might create a peace agreement that could actually work. But
you're talking about now this one that is so controversial and is been like a political football, and it, number one, the ones proponing say, yes, it could bring peace. Others say it is extremely deceptive. Is there anything that you see in the prophecies of Nostradamus or anyone else about the fact that this could be a very deceptive step?
Well, I definitely see that within all three major or four major parties that could be involved in this war, who are involved in either supporting or trying to sabotage this peace treaty, whether they are the neoconservative, neoliberal factions of the United States Congress, whether they are in the Knesset of Israel as Zionist supremacists, whether they are the Revolutionary Guards in Iran, or the Saudi House of Saud, the new Saudi king in Saudi Arabia. All of them, whether they're, and I don't think they're too conscious of it, are being motivated by the deception of a misunderstanding of their doomsday, Armageddon, eschatological prophecies. And so there's a religious, kind of an unconscious religious factor in this that's very messianic and very dangerous. That there is and in my book, Nostradamus, The War with Iran, Islamic Prophecies of the Apocalypse, which is available in print as well as at Amazon as an ebook. I talked about in the newest edition how you have Islamic prophecies that are being engaged right now very clearly from the Hadith, the conversations of Muhammad, that indicate, and it's quite a talk going on in the Middle East about it, that Khorasan is the ancient name of Afghanistan, and that Muhammad said the great holy war would start when the black flags would come out of the eastern portions of Khorasan, which is exactly the stronghold of Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, and their degenerations into Islamic State, Daesh. And so their black flags are flying and they are marching. And the idea is that they will come and take Al-Quds, which is the name in Arabic for Jerusalem, and restore the third holiest shrine, the Temple Mount, where Muhammad, it is said, flew off on a horse to paradise. So, a lot of us in America didn't notice that for years when Ahmadinejad, the former president of the Iranian Revolutionary Republic, used to start with a Farsi prayer, even in front of the United Nations. And the prayer that he invoked was that we now hope we live within the times of the Mahdi, the deliverer, the 12th and final imam of Shia prophecy. So there are people, evangelical Islamicists in Islam, who see this as the time. You have the same going on in Israel, with the fundamentalists looking at this as the time. Even Netanyahu's wife, at one point, Vanity Fair reported through contacts in Haaretz newspaper, that she used to yell at people and saying, "Don't you realize that my husband will save us from the second Holocaust?" And so there's this feeling of judgment of some kind coming. And then you have with John Hogue writing he's almost become the Jose Arguelles of Christian Bible study, kind of half taking what I contend in the book are interesting correlations to lunar tetrads, but also embellishing and improvising and making up what I would say are a lot of imagined projections added to the biblical fervor of what the blood moons mean. And in my book, I try to separate the imaginative stuff from what the biblical prophecies that triggered the whole blood moon discussion actually said. And so you have that from the west side. You have the Israeli side. You have the Iranian side, and now you have Saudi Arabia stepping in, because whatever happens with this peace treaty, they're probably now going to buy nuclear weapons from Pakistan and become a nuclear power. So that would mean we now have Israel as a kind of a renegade nuclear power, because it's not involved in a nuclear proliferation treaty, so it's on its own. And now we have a second, which is Saudi Arabia, and then there's the unknown about Iran. The thing that's really scary about this in prophecy is that the war that Nostradamus talks about is planned. And the dating that he gives is around now, astrologically. The same stars align that are relatively rare for this war. And then a year later, and it's prepared by the West. So the West is the main force of this idea of, and deception, self-deceived concept based on ideological and religious ideas that Iran needs to go down, and you have a similar situation on Islam. So it's very volatile situation. Add to that the fact that we may have started right around the first blood moon. We may have started in around that was 15th April 2014. Just 5 days after that took place, there was a grand cross of cardinal planets, which is exceedingly rare, far rarer than the lunar moons, that took place 5 days. So that means in astrology terms, the blood moon appearing was within the orb of influence of that grand square. And what it basically indicated, since right around that time is when the Ukrainian Civil War began. And it's the Ukrainian Civil War that set the world on course, perhaps, for the two countdowns that Nostradamus gave for when the great Northern Brothers, who at a certain point, when they had both had eagles as their totems again, that the danger would be that the brothers who are not yet brothers from the North, the former Soviet Union, now Russian Federation, and the United States, the Russians have a double-headed eagle now since '92. America has the bald eagle. That they would go to war in either 3 years and 7 months or 13 years after a new Cold War began. And so now the question is, when do we start counting down? It's very likely that blood moon number 1 in this tetrad, with this even rarer grand cross in astrology, may actually give us the countdown date. And that would mean that the next U.S. president will probably face some kind of Cuban Missile Crisis issue over Ukraine or over Iran, simultaneously perhaps, including the collapse of Syria, which I see coming next year. This will actually create a situation where we may have brinkmanship with the Russians, and the fact that both sides have 8,000 plus nuclear weapons, that we could see the thing that many of the World War prophets, which I collected, which include Nostradamus, the German 17th century cowherd, 1700s cowherd Stormberger, and Edgar Casey, and several others lesser known, had a tremendously accurate track record in dating and describing World War I and II. And they, except for Casey, they all unanimously foresee a third world war that comes when the people of the earth walk with their eyes wide open into these catastrophes. In short, they're so deceived that they don't even see what they're doing and how it comes, and suddenly there it is. And it could be coming as soon as the end of 2017, around November, December, if this countdown is right, because 3 years, 7 months, or in 2027.
So 2017, what other prophecies support that? Like, what does the Hopi prophecy, how does that play into this in supporting that?
The Hopi prophecies are a whole different look from a whole different perception of the fourth world, of the native peoples. The Hopi Indians are one of the most ancient, have the most ancient known settlements in North America that have been occupied uninterrupted in certain pueblos at Four Corners in the Hopi lands. That's the point where Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, and Arizona meet. That they've been inhabited since 1100 AD. They have, in the core of their long oral tradition, share very similar views from the 500 Indian nations of North America and also the Mesoamerican Empire traditions of the Maya and the Aztecs. And generally, they see the world that we're currently in as the fourth death and resurrected world in their mythology of how the world came into being. So we're in the fourth world that if a certain prophecies are fulfilled, will indicate that we are in the time of the season of the fourth world's destruction into the new and better fifth world, which is called the Great Purification. And it is a purification by fire. Now, it's not made clear whether the fire is literal, whether it's global warming, or whether it's a change in consciousness that burns away all the illusions. It could be all of them, depending on who you are, because one of the things the Hopi said is that most of the people that would die in this great purification would drop dead from their own fear of change. And the people that could embrace a new way of looking at a new world would be the core for the new humanity that would come after this purification by fire. Now, it starts with the Hopis start with this idea that when the fourth world was created, there were two brothers. There was the younger red brother from Turtle Island, which is North America. By the way, if you look at North America, including Mexico, it looks like an abstract of a turtle. You know, the peninsulas and shapes look like, if you were looking from space, it would look somewhat like a turtle. So Turtle Island is how they call North America. And that Turtle Island, the red brother, who was more harmonious and yin, feminine in his energy, intuitive, was related to growing things and ecologically interested. His older brother, the white brother, called Pahana, was more yang, more masculine and investigative, searching, scientific. He left Turtle Island to places abroad, and the story goes that if he ever came home with his tribe of the white brothers, if the Great Spirit had broken a tablet to both brothers, and on that tablet, if he came back and showed the tablet he had a circle, then it meant he had come full circle to his complete maturity, and the red and white brother could then work together as complementaries and build a beautiful world. But the warning is, if he came back with the tablet bearing a cross, beware of him. He has not come whole. He has come back home perverse. And the Hopis, when they saw the first missionaries coming to their pueblos with their crosses and their flags with crosses, they realized that these white brothers were fulfilling that prophecy, and they realized in the 1700s, in the 16th century, late 16th century, 17th century, that when they first saw a lot of white people coming there, they actually eventually kicked out the missionaries. And for the oncoming apocalypse, which is commonly foreseen and anticipated by many Native American seers, and my book on the essential Hopi prophecies also look at some of those prophecies as well as the Hopi. They started seeing the signs of the final days of the purification begin when the white man brought an animal they never saw before, a longhorn cow, steer or something, and when they began to come and bring wheels to the land of the Hopis, because the Hopis never used wheels for transport. So the covered wagons came in. That was another indication. And then when they started laying iron roads, and with great iron horses raging down the iron roads, the train, when Pahana would start setting up in the sky iron ropes that would be hoisted up in the sky. Those were telegraph wires. And then later, when the white brothers started to crisscross the sky in cobwebs, that was the introduction of flight and planes. Then would come a period when there would be a great war. And in that war, three great forces would be set Turtle Island. They were the forces of the rising sun, the swastika, and the Great Red. The swastika is Nazi Germany. The rising sun is Imperial Japan. The Great Red is the Soviet Union. Then, after that, when the white man would create a weapon that they called the Gourd of Ashes. The Gourd of Ashes, when it was lit off, it's a huge bomb that would light off, and the land that was burnt by the bomb wouldn't grow anything. It would be sterile. And if you look at a Hopi gourd, if you turn it on its neck, it looks just like a mushroom cloud with a neck of smoke. So the gourd of ashes, most likely, the messengers, this was the point in the prophecy where they realized that they had to end their silence and begin to share their prophecies for the final warnings, because it really was coming soon, the Great Purification. So in my book, I look at those final warnings, which basically, to make a long story short, all steps have been fulfilled. So at any time now, we are set to see this great cycle of history change. It's important, though, to remember, especially with the silliness that happened around the 2012 Mayan calendar, which I have been a sympathetic skeptic of for 25 years, since Jose Arguelles kind of mixed a lot of things together and made it kind of a New Age cult movement in prophecy. That if you actually talk to people, shamans, and people who are actually part of the culture, rather than people who presume to impose themselves upon the culture, which I contend is what Arguelles did, they will tell you that you don't have a specific date in the Mayan calendar where you look at a certain moment on December 21st, 2012 at midnight, and suddenly ding dong, you get a whole new age or the end of the world or a golden age. This is so Pahana-ish, white. That's the white man's way of looking at things. Indian or Native American prophecy works more on the rhythms of nature. Yes, the great Baktun 5,000-year cycle that the Mayans were calculating did reboot, and it's indicating that a season in history is changing. And seasons don't change overnight. They are gradual. Even if it's quick, it takes weeks, months. So to bring this back into the connection of Shemitah, the seven Shemitah cycle of the Hebrews and the Jews, and the fact that Islam is seeing indications of things, the great fight that's coming of Armageddon, and then we have similar things related to Iran and the countdown of the new Cold War being much shorter and ending into a sudden thermonuclear confrontation. All of these things are the storms of a season's changing, I would say. And it is not, and I would even say if there's a correlation between what John Burroughs and others have seen in those grids, again, it's specific to a more gradual change. But yes, we're even in the gradual part of that change. History is quickening, and there's a number of things indicating if one can step back from all this and not be kind of lost in one's dogma about, okay, it's going to be exactly how our religion sees it or their religion sees it, but just in general to see look how everybody's generally indicating towards some big changes coming. And then you just take a look at that compared to objective evidence. We have a planetary disaster underway, a runaway global warming, which would very much look like the purification by fire if it ends up being something like a Permian extinction. We have the elements, the elements that are all laid out. All it needs is a spark to at least try to make Armageddon happen according to misunderstandings of the prophecies. There's a lot of people in different extreme religious views about end times that almost hope that things will be destroyed because they have this idea that Jesus Christ is going to come out of the clouds or they're going to be taken up in a rapture. And maybe that will happen. But it's 50-50 chance that a lot of the prophecies of the book of Revelation were not about our times, but have been misinterpreted for 2,000 years because St. John, whether he was the Apostle John or one of the many John apostles that were around in early Christianity, when he wrote that book, he made it very clear in the text that there's almost 20 or 30 references to it's now, it's around the corner, it's in your days, it's going to happen in your lifetime. It's very immediate in what he's trying to talk about, and when he's just begging us to uncover who the beast and the Antichrist is, when he talks about 666 or 616, that's the other number in other editions for the number of the beast. These actually translate from Hebrew letters into numerical values that spell out to very contemporary antichrists. 666 in the Greek, which the book of Revelation was written in, is Neron Kaiser, Nero Caesar. And the other edition, 616, is Caligula Kaiser, Caligula Caesar, the two Roman emperors that did the most to harm the Holy Temple. Caligula forced the statue of Jupiter to be placed on the Holy Temple grounds in Jerusalem. So, that was a tremendous impurity, and so he is reviled by the Kohanim, the priests. The other was, of course, Nero, who it was during his reign that the great rebellions began, and in 69 there was the great destruction of Jerusalem, and the Jewish people were cast and banished all over the world from that. And a lot of people contend that the metaphorical prophecy of the Revelation was really about that, and not about our times, not about any raptures or anything. So we could actually be seeing, and when you consider that this apocalyptic prophecy is also inspired Islam and other Judeo-Christian rooted Western religions, and if it's based on a misunderstanding, then the whole thing that people are trying to generate in the Middle East may all be a deception, a self-deception of 2,000 years.
What would your odds be that between now and 2017, that 3-year period, that whether it is based on a house of cards or something in the destiny of timelines, that we would actually see a nuclear exchange on this planet?
It's highly likely, and made more so by the fact that this time around, and this karmic echo of the lessons unlearned by the Cuban Missile Crisis, is that we don't have a John F. Kennedy on one side, and I would even contend we don't have a Khrushchev either. It's not well known from the Western view of this that when Nikita Khrushchev realized his mistake, he immediately was trying to backtrack and stop from his end as much as Kennedy's end this terrible thing that the Iranians said that we had set in motion. And simply it was from a misunderstanding. Khrushchev used to, in his dacha in Crimea, said, 80 miles over the water in the Black Sea there, the Americans point missiles at us. Why can't we do the same thing in Cuba? I mean, what's wrong with that? It seems fair. If they're going to threaten us this way, why don't we balance it out our way? Of course, he miscalculated, never understanding that unlike Russians who have been constantly invaded, Americans have never been invaded, and they can't deal with suddenly having that kind of a threat on. They went ape, and the Russians didn't understand how we would freak about that. And so, but he immediately had the presence of mind to try to backtrack this thing and get out of it. When I look at the level of leadership that we're seeing today, and I think of how so often Nostradamus describes our modern leaders as imprudent and childish, I'm very concerned, because if there's a crisis like that over what goes on in Ukraine, or over what goes on in someone's presumption that the Iranians are not following the deal, and then suddenly we end up arming and sanctioning and amassing troops, it's not clear whether we have the same kind of mature people who can quickly learn from their mistakes. So I think it's highly likely that we could have what I hope would be such a close call scare that we back off from this, and then maybe are better ready 10 years later to deal with the second wave that comes in. And I will say this, and it's not going to probably go over well with the American audience, but I will say this for the prophetic record. And if there ever is a person that is more rational in between this fight between the NATO and Russia, it is actually the Russian president. Vladimir Putin is a rationalist, and he is, we don't agree with his politics or how he runs his affairs, but when it comes to geopolitics and realpolitik, he is actually got a much more level head about this than our president and our leaders, who are far more ideologically pushing this thing, and they don't seem to understand. There's even people in Washington that say, why do we have all these atomic weapons if we can't use them? I mean, there's been a steady change in the policies from Bush to Obama that have changed the rules of nuclear engagement that we will use, and we've opened the door to using them. It's almost like the people with open eyes walking into these catastrophes have forgotten exactly what it was like to grow up and live during the Cold War. Or they've forgotten what it was like to... I mean, I remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. It happened just a few days before my 8th birthday. And it was something that changed me. Even as a young boy, I was going home when that was all going on, looking around, and I had my McNamara moment, where McNamara, who was in the cabin of Kennedy, walked out of his house, looked around at the buildings and looked around at his garden and his family and said, tomorrow this may all be gone. And I had the same feeling of, wow, this is huge. That intelligence doesn't seem to be sparking in the people that are currently running our country. It's more sparking in the Russians because, of course, they haven't forgotten that they lost 27 million people in the last World War.
John, what about the messiahs themselves, whether Christ or other, that there could be other dimensional players in all this?
The thing about... There's two things. I don't deny that there are other dimensional players in this, because certainly we are being visited. I mean, I've had my own UFO experiences. I know that that is happening, but I often feel that there's almost a remarketing in our subconscious of those kind of divine anticipatory things that we kind of hope where somebody better than us, something higher than us, a God, a savior, will come down and at the last minute save us from ourselves. And I, over the years, have felt more and more that extraterrestrial civilizations that are observing us are actually observing us to see whether we will reach a point where we have to realize that we have to save ourselves from ourselves. And it's at that point, when that critical mass is engaged, that, I think, is when they will come forth and introduce themselves. I don't think we're there yet as a mass. Individuals are there, but as a mass of the human race, we may have to undergo this very dangerous next decade, the 2020s, and through that experience actually begin to evolve again. A lot of mystics in Asia, including my own meditation teacher Osho, used to say, why do you presume that you've evolved up to this point? Maybe evolution hasn't really happened yet. I mean, it can only start happening. Consciousness, he used to say that consciousness, instinct is collective. And for the millions and millions of years that animals evolved, to a certain point where their brains and their vehicles could contain the spark of consciousness, when the primates happened and then when human beings happened, there was a potential then for consciousness, but then the roles were reversed. There's no collective consciousness. Consciousness is embraced one individual at a time. And I got to wonder, and it's just a simple childlike question, you've never seen an army of Jesus Christ come into the world in history, have we? We've never seen an army of Buddhas or an army of Socrates. These people, we haven't seen an army of Rabias and Miras, some of the women mystics of India. They're always alone. They come out of the wilderness alone. They are one person, living in their truth completely. They are Zarathustra from Nietzsche's book, coming down from the mountains into the villages. They're not minion. They are rare gems, just like the rare gem of nature that if you look at a tree, a great tree that creates many, many, many seeds, enough seeds to fill a grain mill. But how many become a great tree? And I think the laws of nature often play in the laws of consciousness here, that there's infinite opportunities, infinite planets, infinite races, civilizations possibly, but very, very, very few flower into their full potential. So the thing to do is to create more and more ways in which the human race creates a civilization that provides a better ground, better water, better food for the nourishment of consciousness in this planet. And right now, we're doing the opposite.
John, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I'd like you to walk us through what you think is going to take place after this last blood moon going forward and some of the signs that we have to watch for.
All right.
And that will wrap up the first hour of tonight's interview with John Hogue. To find out the latest on John, log on to his website at HogueProphecy.com. Stay right there as we start hour 2 of tonight's program right after these messages from your choice of UFO paranormal talk radio on the World Wide Web, KGRAradio.com. You're listening to the KGRA digital broadcast station, Van Buren, Arkansas, Sarasota, Florida, as we begin hour 2 of tonight's interview with John Hogue on Phenomenon Radio with John Burroughs and Linda Moulton Howe. To begin the second half of tonight's show, here's John Burroughs.
Thanks, Race. John, when we were going to break, I asked if you could explain a little bit what the prophecies show going right up now to the 28th, what could happen on the 28th, and over the next 2 years where you have said there's a possibility we could end up in full war. If you go a little bit into that and a little bit about what to watch for and what the prophecies show.
Well, first off, the actual date in our Western white man's calendar is the Vahana calendar, which I was saying earlier is always fixated on an exact moment for things to happen. Is just a marker for change, a point where, okay, around this time, things are going to quicken even further. The 28th of September is where the final blood moon takes place. And of all 4 of them, it's the only one that can be seen over Israel and the Middle East. All the other blood moons have been seen more over America and Australia and Asia. So that's... and just in a little aside here, that one of the contentions I have with the current fascination that's been triggered by Reverend John Hogue of Cornerstone Church in San Antonio, Texas, a super church, and he's one of the major figures in evangelical Christianity, is that he has said that there are 3 times that the Jewish history was marked by lunar tetrads, but actually it's been 5 times that there have been lunar tetrads, and on the other 2 there was nothing of any significance that happened related to milestones in Jewish general history. It's also odd that these glowerings of red bloody moons and eclipse often happen after the event. For instance, we were talking earlier about how Israel was born during a blood moon, and that actually was in 1948. The blood moon happened a year after. It seems that if Hagee's right and that God's view of the motions of planets and stars is perfect, then maybe it is, but it's not what the imperfect man who's trying to project it to be is what it is. I mean, if God's going to give you a message, I would think that the light of the moon would happen before the events and not after them, kind of anticlimactic. So what that simply says to me is that these moons do sometimes, in the case of Jewish history, mark certain times. What I find more interesting about the final blood moon, as with the first blood moon, is when they start, if you look beyond the narrow dogmatic views that people have, where they want their narrative of the future to happen and nobody else's, if you can look at all the traditions and step back, you realize that there's a convergence. And to me, this convergence of important things happening. The fact that the Saturn has been transiting Scorpio and came back for 3 final months this year after about 2.5 years. And in layman's terms, what that means is it's a cycle in U.S. history, because in my view of the U.S. chart, Saturn, Scorpio is the rising sign of the United States, which I explain in detail in Predictions 2015-2016, why that's so. In short, every 30 years or so, 29 to 30 years of the orbit of Saturn around the Sun, America has an opportunity to redefine itself. It goes into a malaise, it gets flat, and then it has to kind of redefine itself. And we are in one of those it's time to redefine ourselves moments, which if I find interesting in that it's been so murked out by these Uranus-Pluto squares that started in 2011, which basically saw leaderless rebellions in the streets of Araby and Middle East, as well as in Occupy Wall Street and even the Tea Party, railing against establishment, but pretty much leaderless, full of sound and fury and signifying no political major changes. Well, that all started changing around May of this year, when the last of those squares finally let go of us and let go of this deadlock. And now there's movement. There's movement from the powers that be, the establishment, as well as popular movements that are arising. And I think that it is no surprise to me that when the establishment tries to, as I've been predicting, choose for us in this republic 2 corporate blessed candidates, basically in the guise of the Bushes and the Clintons, as kind of what their plan was for the people to pick. Either one winning is a win for those people who basically successfully, through the Supreme Court, created Citizens United, which effectively in January of 2010 took the republic away from the American citizens and gave it to moneyed interests and made free speech a dollar bill, and corporations became people. And so, but not all people in this country are created equal under that arrangement. Now you've absolutely seen the system flooded with money, and what you've seen in recent times with the sudden unexpected rise and success of Bernie Sanders on the left and Donald Trump on the right are 2 candidates. If you love them or hate them, they have harnessed the collective frustration of the American people, and significantly so. So what I'm seeing is since we did not reform the things we needed to reform during the Saturn transit, which ends just a few days before the blood moon, the final blood moon, we are now going to have to live with the consequences in the next 30 years into the 2040s of not redefining ourselves. It'll be rougher road, what I'm saying. I'll give you an example. When the Civil War was coming to an end, that was one of the Saturn returns, and where we redefined ourselves is we came through that awful period of U.S. history and redefined ourselves to expand west and create our great nation that in the next 30 years we became a world power. We became an influencer in world affairs, economically and politically. But during the 1920s, during the next Saturn return, people really didn't take stock and review the last 30 years so they could prepare for the next 30 years to do things better than they did before. And guess what happened? You had the economic depression of the 1930s, and then you had America and other countries not anticipating and stopping before it got too powerful the Axis alliances of Hitler and Mussolini and Japan. And we had to fight a world war that, as a consequence of not redefining ourselves, killed 400,000 Americans and nearly 60 million other people. But by the Saturn return in the early 50s, Eisenhower started to think big and think in long term of infrastructure and things to make our country great with the interstate highway system. And that was what brought into the next 30 years of that Saturn return one of the greatest periods of prosperity the history of humanity has ever seen. Thus comes the second term of Ronald Reagan, which is the term in which he really was able to bring in a lot of his ideas. But the problem with these ideas, as it turns out, is they are systematically or systemically flawed. And the things that Roosevelt had put in to stabilize the banks and stabilize the things that Saturn rules under Scorpio, which is finance, money, inheritance, went awry in the next 30 years, and now you have the situation here. And the answer is that, as I predicted in 2016, predictions 2015, 2016, we had our first oops moment of the next recession in August, and it happened. With the Chinese slowing down their economy and starting to devalue their yen and renminbi currencies, which means now they, whether they like it or not, they've entered the currency war situation, a rather significant player because they are now the number one economy in the world. Now, that means that we get in September and into October, when this blood moon ends, we get the first big warning that whatever quantitative easing is being done to this fiat economy, it's more like a defibrillator that's been pumping, like a defibrillator pumps electricity into a suffering heart from a heart attack. These quantitative easings have been pumping electricity and fake electric money, basically, into the financial part of the economy, not the real economy, and making it look like the heartbeat of this economy is beating. When the interest rates are lifted, which I predicted they would be lifted in September, I might be wrong about that, it could be delayed, but when they are lifted, it's like taking the defibrillators off the chest, and the economy will flatline or show a sign of flatlining. They will have to either bring this back into a fourth quantitative easing. China is now quantitative easing, like we were. And this is setting up what I've always felt is the year where things really collapse into what I call the Greater Depression. And that is 2016. And that will have quite an impact on the presidential elections. You know, it's very likely. I've been for years saying, because one of the things I'm most well known for is documenting, predicting the popular vote of every president who won since 1968. I'm 12-0. And I have long seen an echo of our actions in the future that seemed to assure, at least the plan of the corporate interests was to make sure that this presidency election would end with Jeb Bush, that is, excuse me, not George. That's the part of the problem with Jeb. It always feels like I'm talking about George. And then the other dynasty, the Clintons, with Hillary Clinton. But I always thought that Hillary Clinton, since she is a karmic echo of lessons unlearned with Richard Nixon, that she would, when you have these karmic echoes, you have the same lesson come in kind of a negative photo of what they were before. Quickly, to give you an example, the thing we haven't learned from the 1960s to 2003, from Vietnam to an invasion of the Middle East in Iraq, is the karmic echo of Lyndon Baines Johnson, a Democrat from Texas, because of the Gulf of Tonkin incident with the North Vietnamese and the U.S. Navy, which later was proven to be erroneous, got America into a ground war in Southeast Asia, which was very ruinous and full of problems. And in some way, we have not seemed to extricate ourselves from repeating this nation-destroying and also harming our own nation habit. Because we did it again, 40 years, usually it's 40 years, 2 generations, 1 to 2 generations, a karmic echo comes back. And lo and behold, it comes back. And again, we have a Texan president. And again, it's not the Gulf of Tonkin in the jungles of Vietnam, but it's WMDs, weapons of mass destruction that aren't actually there. We're not going into a quagmire made of the mud of the tropics. We're going into a quagmire of quicksand of a desert. See how it changes? It's changed, but it's the same. A Texan does it again, but he's a Republican. It's some kind of BS idea was the grounds of getting people in a war precipitously. Gulf of Tonkin becomes WMDs. That were not there. And now we're stuck in that ever since 2003, and we haven't learned the lesson, and we may very well have a president who very proudly to this day is happy that she voted for giving powers to President Bush to do what he did in Iraq. It lost her the election, as I predicted it would, when she ran back in 2008. I called it Hillary Clinton's albatross. It is the rhyme of the ancient sea mariner. This man kills the lucky bird, and when the people in the high seas lose this bird flying around their boat, they take the bird's body and tie it around his neck as his symbol, his scarlet letter, if you will, of the sin that he committed against this lucky bird, which has now cursed the ship like the Flying Dutchman cursed ship. It's a great romantic poem by Coleridge of the 19th century. Well, I use that metaphor to say that her vote and made Hillary Clinton that was her albatross around her neck. That her vote in favor of George Bush's war powers lost. I said, and I wrote it in 2nd March 2007 in Hillary Clinton's Albatross. The article is still at HogueProphecy.com in the archives, where I said this is the one thing that could keep her from being president. And it was. She said she'll run against Obama. It'll be a very close election in the primaries a year from now, but Obama could win because he'll carry the anti-war factions. So anyway, the thing is that she's now back again. She's suffering from the situation with the email gate. This is another echo going on because she echoes Richard Nixon. She will be the Democrat Richard Nixon. And I don't mean that disrespectfully because Richard Nixon did many great things. He was a complicated figure. He did do some amazing things domestically and internationally, but he also had that dark side, and he listened to it, and it ended up in scandal of Watergate destroying much of his work. If that hadn't happened, I think we would be considering Nixon one of the great presidents of the United States. Hillary Clinton has the same problem and the same potential to repeat or learn from the lessons. And what I see in this scandal of the emails is that she's still carrying the karmic echo of unlearned lessons. And it may very well be that such a scandal I might have miscalculated, and it's not going to end her presidency when she's elected in 2016, but it might prevent her from even becoming a candidate. The thing, though, that I feel is that after Saturn ends its tour in Saturn, in Scorpio, things are going to lighten up for her, and she is definitely going to have a second wind and do what many Scorpios do, rise from the ashes like a phoenix. And so she's in this race, maybe to the end, because Bernie Sanders is not going to ever get past the superdelegates that basically, it's something that's not even the Republican Party, where in the Republican Party, they really still depend on the people's vote in the primaries for their candidate. The Democratic Party created a situation with superdelegates where if the people vote a certain way, as they were actually in favor of, more people were voting for Clinton than Obama, but these delegates who are an elite group of political players, actors, kingmakers, senators, and legislators of the Democratic Party, they decided to vote against what the people were leaning towards, and that's what gave Obama the very close victory in the primaries. Bernie Sanders is a changeling in the bird's nest of Democrats. He is a socialist, and they will not forgive him playing the game of Democrat when he's really an independent socialist. I have no problem with him being a socialist, but this is literally like putting somebody in their power circle who's not one of them. The superdelegates will make sure he never gets past them and into the candidacy.
Since you have a 12-0 calling presidents that you've been able to do this, what do you think is going to happen in terms of the big picture, this whole issue of whether we could actually be in a nuclear war by 2017?
I'm getting there.
Okay.
Just hold on. I'm getting there. This situation will definitely see the two people who might actually start that war be elected as President of the United States. And the question is, which one will it be? So this is where this is leading. And this is significant to all the other things that we're talking about, whether there's a conflict or not. The thing I'm seeing is that there's still a very good chance that Hillary Clinton will be elected as a nominee for president for the Democrats. Now, on the other side, what I'm seeing is if the moneyed interests can somehow get behind Bush or somebody and stop Donald Trump, they will have to do it very soon because the Republicans have set up their rules for the campaign in a way that it'll pretty much be decided by whoever is way ahead early. And right now, Donald Trump is pushing, in some polls, 40%. And the only other person that is contending with him is another man who's not a politician as a career. All the rest of the people are under 10%, and most of them aren't even 8 or 5%. That whole platoon of people who number significant governors, leading senators, Lindsey Graham, governor of Texas, other governor of Florida, Jeb Bush. The establishment is being denied by the people, just as the news agencies right now are blacking out the fact that Bernie Sanders on the left is filling up Madison Square Garden with thousands and thousands of people. That's not even given much news. But the thing that's coming on here is, I was telling you before that things have loosened up now, and that there's popular disgust for what's going on in the world, and people are also demonstrating against the technocratic dictatorship of the EU and other places. That there is a wellspring of revolution in the air, and that is one of the things that is very important. Like, what happens after the blood moon? We enter fully into a period of revolution, an upheaval, and people starting to go on the move, people starting to question the way things have been done. I mean, the things that are coming next in the next century are not just the threats, next decade are not just the threats of dangers of war, but the threat that there's an old think that wants to go there where the people really don't want to go there. But the people are not being represented by those plutocratic governments. And ironically enough, Donald Trump is going to surprise a lot of people if he ever gets all the way. He has a very good chance of actually being the Republican nominee. When I look at his astrology, my eyebrows lift, and I go, my goodness, this character could actually become president of the United States. But the one that scares me more in relation to our question, into relation to whether there's going to be a thermonuclear conflict, is Hillary Clinton. She actually, I think that if Trump were president, given that despite all of his volatile and complicated nature, he is a Gemini and a genius in some respects to what he does. But just like another famous Gemini in history, Richard Wagner, we often run the danger of latching on to Wagner's anti-Semitism at the loss of embracing the genius of the man who also wrote Tristan and Isolde and The Ring and revolutionized music and mass media. Donald Trump also throws at us things that make it easy to latch on to those things: his bombacity, his misogyny, his swiping all Mexicans coming over the border as a certain way. Of course, actually, if you listen to him, that's not what he later explained what he was doing, but still. In spite of all that, when the economy goes down, and basically what presidents do is they sell a slogan. All modern politicians derive their ideas from the father of modern politics, whether they are similar to him or not. And the father of modern politicking is Adolf Hitler. He is the man that created the mass media style of politicking, the slogans, the yes we can. It was Deutschland erwache in his time, Germany awake. It's like it doesn't actually say something, but it stirs you. Change we can believe in never defines what the change is, and belief is kind of a qualified ignorance. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. What is never asked in that. But in the same way, I can make things work. I am a businessman who can make things happen and make things work, and I'll make America great again. As sloganistic and demagogic as that is, in an economic collapse and crisis of 2016, that might get Donald Trump all the way to the White House, because even his misogynist sides will be ignored, because people are less concerned about whether somebody says something bad about Mexicans or women, and much more concerned about whether they got a job next week. So it is very strong chance that he's going to be running against Hillary Clinton. And given the grounds of the situation, if he were made president, looking at his astrology, I'm currently right now in the midst of writing a book about this, which I'll release as a short book soon. It's really a hard thing for me to decide. Is he going to miscalculate? Is he going to try to project himself in a way that starts a war? Or is he the deal maker that he often is in his private life, that is just not the kind of man who would want to destroy everything that he's built with a thermonuclear war? With Hillary Clinton, I feel there's much more of a chance that she will go to war with Russia. So I think we're, just from her astrology and just from her attitudes towards hawkishness, I don't see so much hawkishness beyond the bravado of Donald Trump if he were president. So your question now.
Yeah. If he is running as a billionaire who can build and rebuild the United States and make it great again, if I'm hearing you correctly, he would become president at exactly the time that you're seeing a complete collapse into depression of the economy.
No, he would be made president after the collapse started. We are in the 8-year cycle that saw Obama win the presidency mainly because of the economic collapse that we last had. Now we're heading towards a deflationary depression. I don't call it the Great Recession because you know that during the time of the Great Depression in the 30s, no one ever called it the Great Depression until it was over. And then I think in 1942, the term was coined Great Depression after they were out of it, building industries for the war.
But my point
and back
is,
then, it was called the Great Recession. So I call what happened in 2008, I call what we're in now a Great Depression.
Well,
and now it's going to downturn again in 2016.
Right, and that is he's running on the idea that he would be able to have a lot of money to do all the infrastructure and everything. And I'm just pointing out, if in fact we went into another recession or whatever it is, an economic collapse from 2016 going forward, that would be his administration, and he wouldn't be able to do what he's talking about.
No, it would happen before his administration. He doesn't become president until 2017, January.
So you're thinking that it's only going to be a one-year collapse?
No, what I'm saying is that it's not about fact. Politics is about persuasion. It's about perception. It does not have a language dealing with realities of objectivity. It is what is unique about Donald Trump's situation is, unlike Richard Nixon saying, I have a plan for Vietnam, which he didn't, but people believed that he could figure it out. He never said what his plan was, just like Donald Trump never says what he's actually going to do, except build a wall and do these things. But Trump brings into this something that even Nixon and certainly Obama had no record of accomplishments that were as significant as a man who is dominated. It really has done what he said: build things, make things work. And even when in the 1990 debacle of when he overdrew and overextended himself, he actually turned that around rather brilliantly. So as we get closer to that, even in an economic collapse, people are going to say, you know what, Donald Trump did get things done, and we'll give him a chance. Maybe he can take us out of this depression. And that's why I think if he can stay in this race and win big early, and then when these economic downturns happen, I think it could even be a landslide for him. Then the question is he able and capable to be president of the United States?
And on that note, I don't want to interrupt, but we really are due a break, so we'll be right back.
Thank you, John. You're listening to the KGRA digital broadcast station, just about to wrap Phenomenon Radio. We've got one more segment coming up right after these messages with our special guest, John Hogue. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Phenomenon Radio for the final segment of tonight's show with our very special guest, John Hogue. And to start the final segment, here's Linda Moulton Howe.
Thank you. And John, just for a moment, going back to the intro where I was talking about that telepathic download that Jim Penniston had by touching the symbols and getting impressions of time travelers from the future coming back to this planet. And the idea is that they have a effort to survive, maybe having gone through their own apocalypse, who knows, but that they are using this earth and that there is a need to use this earth in order to continue to survive. What do you think that level might be playing against what you have just described on the human chessboard, and how many of the human players might actually care about and consider in their plans politically about apocalyptic descriptions, whether they think of it as ETs or whether they think of it as messiahs, but that we have two layers here, the human politic and this other dimension that includes extraterrestrials?
Well, I would say that, for one thing, what one planet does influences all others, because even if you look at the Hubble Space Telescope and see how galaxies seem to unravel in long streams like roots of a tree through the great dark matter of space, it could be very well that it's like a great tree of galaxies, and in trees there are growth points. When these growth points are the points where destruction and creation is happening, and sometimes planets pass through a period when the branch is being grown of being a growth point. Earth is in that place right now. So, of course, for the whole rest of the tree, if you will, the tree of other galaxies and planetary systems who are connected somehow to this great growth, this great tree of life, which is the galaxies of our existence, and planets, that they have a stake as part of the whole tree for whatever is going on in all the growth points, because it's part of the whole tree. So the growth of consciousness and love, or the growth of understanding, is a pressure point right now, a friction point, which is Earth. So of course it attracts those who have either about to go through it, who have advanced somehow, or those mostly who have already become an established tree. So in some ways, maybe our world with all its problems is actually more alive than the places that have passed on to be just nice, solid, hard wood, if you will. So yes, they are here. Whether they will come in the guise of messianic figures like they did in the past, or perhaps did, I don't really know, except that I sense, and my own oracular instincts tell me that they will remain aloof to us, not put on a major show around us, that they are waiting for us to reach a certain point that will happen after all of this difficult period of the 2020s has happened. It's like, do you come in and mess around with the growing point of a tree, or do you let it grow and observe? I think that they will remain more observers rather than saviors in this situation.
Well, John has another year that has come up in his discussions with Hopis and other, and I'm throwing it to him to follow this up in this regard, that we were very interested in what you might say about 2015 to 2016 and these near years, but there is the concept of 2025 to 2026, something really huge happening on the Earth. And you keep referring to the 2020s. I wonder if that's coming from the Hopi or from other.
It's coming from a number of sources, but it's also coming from predictive astrology. What has been so difficult for us from 2011 till May of this year with the Uranus-Pluto squares is going to become a string of Uranus-Pluto trines. And that I see that as the potential for a great breakout, for actually we will have passed through a terrible travail, and the head of the baby will start to appear. And it's like the metaphor of when a mother is having a child. It can be very painful and scary, and something's dying and something's being born, but deep down inside there's an understanding, an innate understanding that something really wonderful could be born out of this mess and pain and travail. And that, astrologically, 2025, especially 26, is well positively placed to avert us from the next danger of a thermonuclear war, which is in 2027. But all of this that we're talking about, there's a huge 500-pound gorilla in the future in the room of prophecy, wool gathering and thinking and contemplating, that I have to say for the record on the show is that the gigantic, enormous crisis of planetary climate change will dwarf even the threats of thermonuclear war, and it's coming. And the tipping point is already moving, like the first stages of a slow avalanche of temperature tsunamis. And it may very well be that when the human race finally recognizes that their existence as a civilization is in peril from their own abuse of the planet, from the use of a system of fuel that is destroying their chance to survive, that's the time when you will see something even bigger than what happened during the arsenal of democracy, when America miraculously built huge armaments to stop Hitler. And the last time we were in a planetary crisis of significance. Although this is much bigger because everything that lives on the planet is affected. World War II didn't affect a lot of areas of the world, but this affects everything, the planetary climate change. And it may have an echo to that in the repetition of, it may be the way out for economic crisis. It may be that President Trump, since he thinks big and often is unorthodox and how he'll be flexible and change going one direction and another, if one studies his life, if he were president, he might grab the idea and be the next FDR and not create an arsenal of democracy, but an arsenal of ecology and become gardeners of the earth. This is whoever the president is, this is there waiting for them, because even Hillary Clinton has voiced hopefully an authentic understanding that this is the big issue in our lives, controlling this runaway global warming temperature tsunami that's coming. And if it may take, the breakthrough to a positive outcome could be happening in the latter half of the 2020s.
Earlier on, you said the Hopis, the steps that led in the Hopi prophecy, most of them have already happened. Can you go into that a little bit deeper?
Yes, we have had. We talked about the Great World War that hit Turtle Island with the swastika, the rising sun, and the red of the communists. And then what would come after that is in air canoes and from the east would come the tribe of the red-cap, red-cloak people, who would come into the lands of the Hopi Indians in great numbers, of the native western lands, and then they would scatter and disappear. What is intriguing about this is that talks a lot about the lamas of Tibet used to come to the Hopi lands, because they have a prophecy about how their dharma, once the Tibetan people were scattered like ants across the world, the dharma of Buddhism would come to the land of the red men. So when these two had converging prophecies, they actually had diplomatic connections to describe their two prophecies, asking, are we the red-cap, red-cloaked people, we lamas from Buddhist lands of India? The other possibility has a more direct personal connection to me, because I used to belong to a tribe of people who wore all shades of red and flame. I'm a disciple of Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, who sent many people from the east to populate in tens of thousands into Oregon, from landing in white with an olive-skinned man in a long white beard from the east in an air canoe. These are some of the other prophecies not related to Hopi, but also out there. And we, in Rajneeshpuram, sent a diplomatic mission to Chief Mongonye, the elder, one of the Hopi elders, David Mongonye, who was one of the chief Hopi elders. I was one of the three people involved in that group, but at the last minute I was not allowed to leave because of the work I was doing in the commune, and my friends went in my stead and talked, and actually the Hopi elder and Bhagwan, who is now called Osho, both invited each other's people to come live in each other's lands. Even though I wasn't there, I've ever since been off again, on again, being a messenger of this event and being a person writing books on the Hopis. And one of my great honors was to meet Thomas Banyakya, one of the earliest messengers of the Hopi message to the world, just shortly before he died, where I offered him one of my books and he blessed it. So there's a connection I personally have, which I go into much more detail in the Essential Hopi Prophecies. So that's one of the stages. The next is that the Bahana, the white man, would create a permanent abode in space. That is the space station that we currently have flying over our skies. There was also talk about the great blue star, the Kachina star, would come crashing into the Earth. But it's not clear whether that was actually fulfilled by Skylab falling or Mir space station falling, or may even be a blue flame out of this current station when it goes down in the 2020s as a sign. Also that they would take rocks from the moon and bring them back to Earth, and that it was a very bad thing to do, they said. That would also be a sign, a final sign. So basically we are in the space station prophecy is the last of the final warnings. So since we seem to be building permanent space stations, another one is planned after this one is over in the 2026, I think. So the idea that now we're consistently keeping a space station in the sky, and of course the Chinese are now going to soon have a space station in a few years in the sky, and the Russians are also pursuing building their own permanent space station. So I would say in general we are in that final warning, and it's been fulfilled. So any time now, the season, the mark for the season changing and the purification of the fire is at hand. And then look at what's going on with our climate. Look how it is heating up with global warming. It is upon us now.
Yeah, today in Japan, they were reporting that unprecedented rain, never seen in such volume, and it is flooded parts of Japan, and even the government is conceding that this is a unique situation in the climate.
Well, I've just, in my little corner of the world, Linda, in the area north of Seattle and the islands in the Puget Sound, I've seen something I've never seen before, and I've been keeping weather records since 1979 wherever I live, and I've been keeping a record which slowly shows steadily a change in the climate up here. This today, when I was driving, I saw no snow on the Olympic Mountains, not a single spot of snow. We didn't have a winter, even though Boston was buried under snows, which is indicative of a super El Nino, which is they're getting more souped up because of global warming. We had a string of 90s, and up here in the islands to have 90-degree weather, 80-degree weather constantly, heat waves that last 15 days, is just is weird. And then when the weather changed and all the great mega fires that have been burning on the eastern side of the state, I mean, one morning I woke up and the dawn was like a huge front of smoke that went from one horizon to the other, and it literally came over us and blotted out the sun. You couldn't see the sun. It was so dark. And then earlier in the same year, I'm walking down with a writer friend to eat, and it's March, and I'm smelling fire smoke. I'm looking up at the sky, and I'm thinking, it's too wet. There's no way this fire's coming from here, but where could it be coming from? And then I suddenly gasped, and I said, oh, no, it can't be coming from central Siberia, because there were some huge fires that were set by men who every year burn the old growth of winter weeds to germinate things and get ready for the next growing season. But because the climate's stronger, the winds that came out of the Central Asian plains were so strong that it unleashed a huge megafire that literally sent smoke thick enough to blot out the sun over my skies 5,000-6,000 miles away.
Wow.
This is, and it went all the way to the east coast of America. It almost circumnavigated the world. And so these are new developments, and the extreme weather is going to, this thing that happened in Japan, the floods were so bad that they washed out a big dam and flooded a whole area north of Tokyo.
That's right. And they have never had anything like that happen before. But, this makes me think again about all your work in Nostradamus and where we began this program today. In Nostradamus, who the quatrains went up into, I believe, into the 3,000s or far from here. Did you ever see anything in his quatrains that you interpreted as extraterrestre, as extraterrestrials, of him seeing them finally interacting with this planet?
Yes, I've actually put them in a book I have out, which is an e-book as well as a printed book at Amazon called The Essential Nostradamus. And what I did is I've written one of the longest books on Nostradamus in 1997 when I looked at all of his prophecies. It was 1,000 pages. This one I tried to go the other pole and just give you past, present, and future prophecies that are just the most amazing, and distant future prophecies. And in them, there is an attempt, I think, from Nostradamus to describe humanity's outreach into the stars and meeting other life forms, other intelligent life forms, and this 16th century man trying to find language to describe things that are so outrageously alien to him. And it's also true that in his prophecies, his final date that he logs in his prophecies, but it does not mean it's a final date for human history, because of what he says after it, is the year 3797. It's nearly 1,800 years from now. So humanity does get through what we're entering, this danger point, somehow. It may have to backtrack and 500 years and start forward again if things really get half destroyed. But still, we're like the shoots of a forest fire. We can grow another forest. It'll take time, though.
Great theme to end on this program, that we may go through some bumpy times, and in fact, the Earth may warm. There might be a nuclear war, but that eventually humanity does get past its own self-destruction and survive.
But you've got to not be mollified by that future. You've got to make that future happen now. And that's my final message for the show. Don't be mollified by, oh, well, it's all going to be good in the future. It will not be good unless we start giving birth to that future so it begins to echo in our present actions.
Thank you, John Hogue, so much.
Yes, thank you, John. And Race, take us forward in time to next week's show.
Thank you so much, John Hogue, for joining us tonight. For John Burroughs, Linda Moulton Howe, and John Hogue, thanks for listening. Right here on the station that brings you the very best in paranormal talk radio topics on the internet, KGRAradio.com. Have a great night, everyone.